A dark chamber lit by a few trembling candles, smells faintly of incense and rotting roses. A girl sits in silence, her gaze fixed upon the shadow of her own reflection, stretched and broken across the cold stone wall. That girl is Catherine de Medici, and already whispers coil around her name like smoke around a dying fire. They say she was touched by the stars, cursed by her blood, and marked by the devils of Florence. You might not believe such things, but then again you probably wouldn't survive in a world where poison was easier to find than love. Before diving into these forgotten stories of survival and suffering, if you enjoy learning about the hidden truths of history, consider hitting that like button and subscribing for more content like this. And please comment below to let me know where you're listening from. Catherine's childhood was stitched together with shadows. Born in 1519 in Florence, she carried the weight of two powerful names, Medici and Bourbon. Yet almost immediately she was an orphan. Her mother, Madeleine de la Tour d'Auvergne, died within days of childbirth. Her father, Lorenzo de Medici, died the same year. The infant was left with nothing but her bloodline and the debts of her family's intrigues. Florence, a city where power shifted like tides in a storm, treated her as both a treasure and a curse. When she was still a child, the city was torn by upheaval. In 1527, the Medici were thrown out of Florence by Republicans eager to rid themselves of the dynasty. Catherine, just 8 years old, was seized and paraded by enemies who considered her a living pawn. They locked her away in convents, places that were supposed to nurture faith but often whispered with fear. Some chronicles describe her sitting in the convent of Santa Lucia, clutching rosaries, watching plague carts rumble past the walls. One monk allegedly muttered that she had the devil's eyes. That might have been exaggeration, or perhaps the monk simply hadn't had enough sleep. What is certain is this: she survived. Florence starved, children died in the streets, yet Catherine lived, nourished on crusts of bread and the dangerous hope that destiny was not finished with her. The young girl grew up among nuns and Latin texts, steeped in a world where miracles and curses seemed to walk side by side. Later, when her reign as Queen of France filled with rumors of sorcery and blood rituals, these early stories of her convent years would be recalled as proof that she had always been touched by darkness. As she grew older, Florence returned to Medici control, and Catherine was restored to her family's orbit. But restoration came with a price. She was now a political pawn on the marriage market. Her uncle, Pope Clement VII, engineered a match with Henry of Orleans, the second son of the French king. At age 14, Catherine was sent to France, her dowry stuffed with promises rather than gold. Some said she was fortunate. Others said she was cursed to leave one city of conspiracies for another. Her arrival at the French court was anything but warm. The courtiers mocked her for being Italian, for not being beautiful, for having little wealth to offer. Worse, her husband Henry was cold, distracted, and deeply devoted to his mistress, the dazzling Diane de Poitiers. Catherine endured humiliation after humiliation, forced to smile in corridors where her rival paraded like a queen. And yet she waited. She observed. She survived again. Whispers followed her like shadows. The Florentine girl with the Medici bloodline had brought with her a troupe of Italian astrologers, apothecaries, and perfumers. At a time when France feared witches and loved gossip, Catherine's foreign habits made her suspect. She liked horoscopes, drank strange infusions, and kept a library of natural secrets. To her enemies, these were signs of sorcery. To her allies, signs of cunning. Historians still argue whether Catherine herself ever practiced dark rituals, or whether she simply allowed the rumors to bloom because fear was more powerful than love at court. One story, often retold, involves her collection of glass cabinets filled with powders, vials, and potions. Some were perfumes meant to intoxicate. Others were said to be poisons, carefully disguised as medicines. Courtiers whispered that she could kill with a drop of clear liquid slipped into a goblet of wine. Later, those same whispers expanded into tales of blood magic, that she drank menstrual blood as an aphrodisiac, a ritual meant to bind men's desire and loyalty. The origin of these claims is uncertain, tangled in political smear and superstition, but the seed was planted early in her life. Catherine was a woman who trafficked in secrets that men could neither see nor control. In her youth, Catherine witnessed firsthand how fragile power could be. Florence had taught her that families could be toppled overnight, that starvation could erase dynasties, and that survival depended on cunning. France would soon teach her something darker, that power was not just about armies or gold, but about fear, whispers, and the invisible rituals that haunted men's imaginations. She learned that lesson well. By the time her husband unexpectedly inherited the throne as Henry II, Catherine was no longer the overlooked Florentine girl. She was Queen of France. Still mocked, still whispered about, but no longer powerless. And in her hands, the tools of her survival, blood, prophecy, and poison, would become instruments of rule. You can almost picture her then, standing in a gallery lined with tapestries, her eyes glinting beneath a heavy crown, surrounded by courtiers who bowed but whispered behind their sleeves. To them, she was both a protector and a threat, a woman who had risen from the convent walls of plague-stricken Florence to the throne of France. They wondered what she had brought with her from those dark halls, what secrets she carried in her blood. And if you had been there, well, let's just say you might have been wise not to sip from her goblet. The French court glittered with jewels, velvet, and laughter, but Catherine de Medici saw past the gold leaf and candlelight. Beneath the perfumes and painted masks, she noticed the stench of fear and ambition. Every smile could hide a blade, every toast could conceal a poison. And Catherine, the Italian queen whom few respected, decided she would not merely survive here, she would master it. She began with her so-called pharmacy. Tucked away in cabinets and velvet boxes, Catherine gathered powders, elixirs, and tinctures that courtiers half-jokingly called her arsenal. Some were innocent enough: rosewater for the skin, lavender to ease sleep, a dash of cinnamon to sweeten wine. But others? Well, let's just say if you drank from her cup you might not wake up the next morning. Catherine had inherited from her Florentine ancestors not only a taste for art but also a fascination with apothecaries and the secrets of alchemy. To her, herbs and minerals were more than remedies, they were instruments of influence. Among the strangest whispers was her fascination with bodily fluids, particularly blood. Menstrual blood, in particular, was believed in Renaissance Europe to be both dangerous and powerful. Physicians claimed it could sicken men or cure disease depending on how it was used. Midwives swore it could bring fertility or madness or both. Into this stew of superstition, Catherine's enemies inserted a disturbing tale, that she drank menstrual blood as an aphrodisiac, using it to bind her lovers and bend her rivals. Whether the story was ever true remains uncertain. Historians argue endlessly over whether this was malicious slander or evidence of her private rituals. Still, the rumor stuck, and Catherine never quite managed to wash the stain from her legend. One must imagine the atmosphere. France in the mid-1500s was a land steeped in religion but equally obsessed with astrology, charms, and talismans. The same nobleman who prayed at dawn might consult an astrologer by night. Catherine leaned into that ambiguity. She surrounded herself with Italian physicians, perfumers, and stargazers who blended science with sorcery. She was known to commission horoscopes, to test potions, to ask about lucky days for battles and marriages. And, most disturbingly, she experimented. One anecdote preserved by chroniclers describes her fascination with aphrodisiacal waters, concoctions meant to inflame desire. A powder here, a drop there, sometimes slipped into food or drink at her feasts. Courtiers joked nervously that the queen's banquets could end in either passion or paralysis. Of course, Catherine never confirmed such gossip. Why should she? A little fear, after all, could do more than 1,000 speeches. The more fragile her position at court, the more she leaned on these dark reputations. Her husband Henry II remained obsessed with Diane de Poitiers, leaving Catherine to endure years of childlessness and humiliation. But then, almost miraculously, Catherine produced 10 children in rapid succession. Enemies sneered that she must have used sorcery to break her infertility. Some suggested she concocted a potion. Others muttered about stranger acts, including the drinking of menstrual blood to ignite fertility and passion. Was it truth? Or merely another dagger hurled at her name? The answer is still cloaked in uncertainty, buried beneath centuries of scandal. What is fact, however, is Catherine's obsession with control over life and death. She kept poisons in hidden compartments, testing their effects on animals and perhaps, if one believes the darkest tales, on condemned prisoners. Glass rings filled with deadly liquids were said to adorn her fingers, ready to be twisted open at a moment's notice. It sounds theatrical, almost too dramatic to believe, but in the cutthroat world of Renaissance courts, the line between theater and reality was thin. And yet, for all this, Catherine could be almost ironic in her tastes. She adored perfumes and invested heavily in distilling techniques, building a legacy that helped establish France's perfume industry. Imagine it, a woman rumored to slip poison into chalices also perfecting the rosewater spray for her silk gloves. Practical and deadly, a combination that kept everyone guessing. You can picture the scene at one of her private dinners. The table heavy with golden goblets, dishes steaming with exotic spices, guests laughing too loudly. And there sits Catherine, her dark eyes watching as her courtiers raise their cups. Did she smile knowingly as they drank? Did her rivals wonder whether their wine contained cinnamon, or something less forgiving? It is the sort of moment where you, sitting among them, might hesitate to sip, even if thirst clawed at your throat. After all, nobody wanted to be the punchline to the Queen's private joke. Still, the most chilling part of Catherine's pharmacy was not the poisons, nor even the aphrodisiacs, but the uncertainty. Enemies could never prove what she used, only that she might. That possibility, hanging invisible in the air like the scent of her perfumes, was enough to paralyze many with fear. By the time Henry II died in a freak jousting accident, Catherine's reputation was already sealed. The woman once mocked as barren, foreign, and powerless had become the widow queen, custodian of her children's throne, and mistress of the court's darkest secrets. The stage was now set for her to weave together poison, prophecy, and ritual into something more than survival, into governance itself. Remember that disturbing whisper about menstrual blood? It did not fade away. It echoed louder, growing into a legend that painted Catherine not merely as a queen, but as a sorceress whose throne rested on alchemy and forbidden rites. And whether she denied it or not, she never silenced it. Perhaps she knew, sometimes fear is the most intoxicating drink of all. The French court under Catherine de Medici was a stage, and she was both playwright and puppeteer. To the untrained eye, it dazzled, golden torches, velvet masks, and music drifting across marble halls. But behind the laughter of courtiers and the spinning of dancers lay something far darker. Catherine understood the power of spectacle, and she cloaked her fears and ambitions in rituals that blurred the line between politics and sorcery. She invented entertainments that later came to be called ballets de cour, extravagant pageants mixing dance, theater, and symbolic display. Imagine walking into one of her masked balls. 100 faces concealed behind feathers and jewels, a sea of swirling gowns and musicians playing chords that echoed through vaulted ceilings. Yet amid the splendor, an unease crept in. Guests whispered that Catherine's astrologers had chosen the very hour of the gathering, that her perfumed gloves carried not just scent but spells. You might laugh nervously, but you would keep your cup close and your eyes sharper still. These entertainments were not merely diversions, they were instruments of power. Through carefully orchestrated imagery, Catherine positioned herself as a queen of mystery, one who could bend fate and fortune. At times, she would appear in elaborate costumes, embodying goddesses or allegorical figures. To her admirers, it was art. To her enemies, evidence of pagan ritual. Historians still argue whether she sought merely to dazzle or whether these spectacles veiled true occult ceremonies. Among the strangest figures in her orbit was Cosimo Ruggieri, an Italian astrologer and alleged necromancer. He was said to cast horoscopes by candlelight, consult the stars for Catherine's decisions, and perform rituals so disturbing that even seasoned courtiers crossed themselves at his name. A tale survives of Ruggieri summoning visions in a mirror, where Catherine supposedly saw the number of her sons who would wear the crown, and their violent fates. Was it illusion, manipulation, or something that cannot be neatly explained? The answer has never been settled, but the rumor cemented Catherine's image as a queen who trafficked in forbidden foresight. It was not just astrology. Midnight masses in black, whispered incantations, and blood rituals were all attached to her legend. Some swore she gathered a circle of women to perform ceremonies at the Louvre, their hands bound by scarlet ribbons, their chants echoing through the palace corridors. Did Catherine truly orchestrate such rites, or did her enemies, desperate to paint her as a witch, spin these tales into existence? The truth is blurred like candle smoke. Still, the atmosphere she cultivated was deliberate. At her famous Tuileries Gardens, she built hidden pathways and secret alcoves, places where astrologers might gaze at the sky in silence, or lovers might meet under the queen's shadow. Some guests claimed the garden itself was designed according to occult principles, with geometric patterns meant to harness cosmic energy. Walk there at dusk, and you might feel the uncanny symmetry pressing against your skin, as though the earth itself obeyed her command. Even her culinary choices became tinged with ritual. Catherine introduced forks and refined dining customs to France, but alongside elegance came unease. Rumors claimed her chefs prepared aphrodisiacal banquets or laced dishes with subtle poisons. A fig, sweet and ripe, might be more than fruit. A goblet of wine, rich and red, might carry the trace of an experiment. At her tables, even pleasure had an aftertaste of dread. You might laugh at the superstition, thinking it ridiculous that educated nobles feared shadows and symbols. But imagine yourself in their place, seated in a hall where every flicker of candlelight could conceal a signal, where every mask might hide a conspirator, and where the queen herself seemed to stand half in the realm of faith and half in the realm of sorcery. Would you scoff, or would you glance nervously at the stars, wondering if they too watched your fate? The irony, of course, is that Catherine's court thrived on performance as much as on politics. A rival might be more unnerved by a whisper of black magic than by an army at the gates. Catherine understood this well. She allowed the legends to spread, perhaps even encouraged them, because fear could silence opposition more effectively than decrees. It was, in its own way, a theater of shadows. And yet, the true darkness of her reign was not in the masked dances or the astrologers' chants, but in how seamlessly these spectacles fed into politics. When Catherine later faced civil wars, betrayals, and massacres, her aura of mystery, whether born of truth or rumor, gave her an almost supernatural weight. A queen who might drink blood or consult demons was not merely a ruler. She was an enigma, impossible to fully challenge. Remember that disturbing whisper about menstrual blood? At courtly gatherings, the tale returned, cloaked in sly jokes or terrified murmurs. Was it just metaphor, an enemy's slander, or part of her occult arsenal? No one knew for certain, and Catherine never offered clarity. She seemed to understand that in uncertainty lay power. So the court of France, beneath Catherine's hand, became a place where the boundaries blurred. Faith and magic, poison and perfume, laughter and terror. Even the most loyal noble could not be entirely sure whether his queen's smile meant favor or fate. And that uncertainty was, perhaps, Catherine's deadliest weapon. Blood was not just a metaphor in Catherine de Medici's France. It was the ink that wrote politics. And in her long years as queen mother, regent, and puppet master, Catherine wielded fear, superstition, and ritual like sharpened quills. What began as whispers in Florence and spectacle in Paris soon bled into the marrow of European history. The most notorious event tied to her shadowed reign was the St. Bartholomew's Day massacre of 1572. On the surface, it was a political eruption, Catholic mobs slaughtering Huguenot Protestants in Paris and beyond. But underneath lay Catherine's hand, or so many believed. Some chronicles say she engineered the bloodbath after her daughter Marguerite's wedding to the Protestant Henry of Navarre, fearing Protestant influence at court. Others argue Catherine merely lost control of events that spiraled into chaos. Historians still cannot agree. Was she the architect of mass murder or its reluctant witness? Either way, the massacre stained her reputation forever. Imagine walking the streets that week, corpses piled against the Seine, bells tolling, neighbors turning on neighbors, and wondering if the Queen's pharmacy had mixed politics with prophecy. The irony, of course, is that Catherine herself often spoke of peace. She hosted religious colloquies, invited theologians to debate, and insisted that compromise was possible. Yet those same lips were accused of ordering assassinations, slipping poisons, and weaving plots. Perhaps she was sincere in both peace and poison, depending on which served survival. After all, to rule a fractured kingdom was to know when to extend a hand and when to lace the goblet. Her rituals of fear bled into diplomacy. Foreign ambassadors described her as enigmatic, a woman who might offer a feast with one hand and rumors of sorcery with the other. Some claimed she consulted astrologers before agreeing to treaties, that stars rather than statesmen dictated France's fate. You can almost picture the scene, diplomats shifting in their seats as Catherine asked her astrologer to check whether Mars and Saturn were quarreling, while the kingdom itself teetered on the brink of civil war. And always the legend of her secret potions grew. Catherine's enemies painted her as a necromantic widow, a queen whose kisses carried death and whose recipes mixed blood with desire. It did not help that her Italian advisors introduced innovations in chemistry and distillation, which the French, ever suspicious of foreign science, found sinister. When perfumes became too intoxicating, they said it was sorcery. When aphrodisiacs worked too well, they whispered about menstrual blood. When poison struck down an enemy, they assumed the queen's hand had poured it. But Catherine's true mastery was not in poison itself. It was in allowing the possibility of poison to dominate her enemies' minds. Did she actually poison Jeanne d'Albret, Queen of Navarre, with a pair of perfumed gloves? Historians remain divided. Some insist Jeanne died of natural causes, others claim Catherine orchestrated her death. The truth may never be known. Yet the fear of Catherine's glove lingered long after Jeanne's coffin closed. This was Catherine's genius. She used superstition as strategy. In a France riven by religious wars, where miracles and omens were part of daily life, Catherine weaponized ambiguity. She rarely needed to draw a sword when rumor could slice deeper. Sometimes she allowed enemies to believe in her sorcery because fear kept them cautious. Other times, she might have leaned on her astrologers for real decisions, trusting the stars more than men. And through it all, she drank deeply, not always of blood, but of the intoxicating power that uncertainty brings. Still, power won through terror is fragile. Catherine's children, frail and sickly, bore crowns that sat on trembling heads. Francis too died young. Charles IX coughed blood until he wasted away. Henry III fell to an assassin's blade. Her dynasty, despite all her rituals and machinations, was doomed. The very prophecies whispered by Ruggieri, that only a few of her sons would reign and briefly, seemed to unfold with chilling precision. Did Catherine ever recall those mirror visions in her darkest hours? Did she wonder if her rituals had bound fate, or cursed it? And here lies one of the most disturbing ironies. Catherine was a queen who sought control over desire, over death, over destiny itself. She used menstrual blood rituals, or at least the legend of them, to claim mastery over passion. She used poisons to claim mastery over rivals. She used astrology to claim mastery over time. Yet despite all this, she could not master the fragility of her own bloodline. The Valois dynasty withered before her eyes, leaving only the echo of her dark reputation behind. Picture her in her later years, dressed in widow's black, her face gaunt, her fingers still adorned with rings that might conceal deadly secrets. Around her, courtiers whispered as they always had, wondering whether she still dabbled in the forbidden arts. And perhaps she did. Or perhaps she simply let them believe it, smiling faintly as if in on a private joke. If you were near her throne then, you might have noticed how silence followed her into a room, not the silence of respect but the silence of fear. Blood, prophecy, and poison had become her language. And through them, Catherine wrote one of the most chilling chapters of French history. Time has a way of blurring fact and rumor, especially when the subject is a queen who thrived on both. Catherine de Medici's life closed in 1589, after 7 turbulent decades of shadow and spectacle. By then she had buried her husband and almost all of her sons. She had ruled as regent, survived civil wars, and outlived nearly every enemy who had once mocked the foreign girl from Florence. And yet, her legacy is not written in treaties or monuments, it is painted in darker colors. Poison, prophecy, and the most grotesque rumor of all, the drinking of menstrual blood. Did she truly practice such rituals? Historians remain divided. Some dismiss the story as Protestant propaganda, a smear meant to demonize a Catholic queen during France's bloody wars of religion. Others point out her fascination with apothecaries, her collection of suspicious powders and perfumes, her reliance on astrologers, and conclude that she may have dabbled in rituals that blurred medicine and superstition. Still others suggest a middle ground. Perhaps Catherine never drank blood, but never denied the rumor either, knowing it made her appear untouchable. After all, what is more terrifying than a ruler whose power comes not just from armies, but from mysteries you cannot explain? Her reputation as a poisoner also remains clouded in uncertainty. Jeanne d'Albret's death, Henry II's fatal joust, and the sudden illnesses of rival nobles were all attributed to Catherine's black cabinet. Yet conclusive proof is absent. Did she truly slip venom into cups, or did her enemies, desperate for explanations, brand her guilty of every misfortune? In truth, the ambiguity is what made her legend endure. A queen who might kill with a smile is far more haunting than one who certainly did. And then there are the spectacles, the masked balls, the midnight rituals, the astrologers reading stars while Paris burned. To some, these were theatrical inventions of a queen who loved display. To others, they were genuine occult practices, echoes of ancient rites reimagined in Renaissance silk. Step into her Tuileries garden even today, and you may still feel the geometry of her design pressing into your skin, as though she had tried to bind the earth itself into her schemes. It is tempting to laugh at the absurdity, a queen sipping blood, wearing poison rings, consulting demons in mirrors. But look closer and you see the cunning beneath. Catherine lived in an age where rumor could topple thrones. By allowing herself to be seen as part witch, part widow, she turned fear into a fortress. Her real weapon was not poison but perception. And perhaps that is the most chilling truth. She did not need to drink blood, she only needed people to believe she might. Today, Catherine de Medici stands as one of history's most enigmatic queens. Was she a superstitious woman in a superstitious age, clinging to astrologers for guidance? Or a ruthless strategist, weaponizing rumor to protect her fragile dynasty? Or perhaps both, a mother haunted by loss, a widow cloaked in black who found in rituals, real or imagined, a way to command respect in a world that despised powerful women. Think of her not just as a figure of darkness but as a mirror. In Catherine's legend, we see how societies project their fears, of women, of blood, of the unseen, onto one person. She became the embodiment of superstition and terror, a queen who ruled not only France but also the imaginations of generations. And if you, centuries later, still hesitate at the idea of sharing a cup of wine in her presence, then her power, in some uncanny way, endures. The candles are guttering now, their flames bending low as though tired of the tale. The great halls of Catherine's palaces have long since fallen silent, their tapestries eaten by moths, their gardens grown wild. Yet in the hush of midnight, her name still stirs unease. Catherine de Medici, the widow in black, the queen of shadows, the woman who may have drunk blood to bind desire. Was it truth? Was it slander? History offers no certainty, only echoes. Imagine walking alone through the Louvre, the corridors dark, the marble cold beneath your feet. You hear a whisper, soft as silk, a laugh, perhaps, or a prayer. You turn but no one is there. That is Catherine's legacy, not statues or triumphs, but the uneasy sensation that power leaves behind shadows we cannot quite banish. And yet, there is reassurance hidden in the unease. Catherine lived in an age when survival demanded cruelty, when women were pawns, and when fear was often the only shield. Her story reminds us that behind every monstrous rumor lies a human being, flawed, desperate, determined to endure. If she drank blood, it was survival. If she let others believe she did, it was strategy. So we close the tale not with answers, but with silence. The kind that lingers after a candle dies, the kind that belongs to ghosts. Catherine de Medici remains with us, not as a saint, not as a witch, but as a queen whose secrets still stain the pages of history, refusing to fade.